I work at an oil company located far away from home, where I spend 3 months at a time before getting a chance to return. They provide us with a residence, food, and everything we need. 3 years ago, I experienced something truly chilling and worth recounting. After finishing work, I decided to head home. I always had my car with me, and the journey usually took around 8 hours. Since there were fewer cars on the road and less traffic at night, I preferred driving during that time to avoid any headaches. I vividly remember that night. The rain was pouring heavily, drowning out the sound of my truck's engine outside. The visibility was abysmal, forcing me to drive slowly and cautiously due to the slippery road. As I followed the familiar path I had taken for years, I must have taken a wrong turn somewhere due to the poor visibility. Suddenly, I found myself in an unfamiliar rural area. The roads were narrow, surrounded by thick bushes. I was completely lost, and even my truck's GPS couldn't locate my position, likely due to the terrible weather. However, a glimmer of hope appeared a few meters ahead. I noticed a person standing there. As I approached, I could see it was a young woman, probably around 20 years old. It struck me as odd since it was so late, around 3 a.m. if I recall correctly. When I reached her, I stopped my car and rolled down the windows. I explained that I was lost and needed directions to the main national road. The girl looked into my eyes but remained silent, staring at me for what felt like an eternity. I began to wonder if she was deaf or mute. Just as I was about to start the car and continue on my way, she pointed to a small road on my right. As soon as I turned to look at the road she indicated, I heard my truck's door slam shut. I instinctively turned around, only to find the girl sitting inside my truck without my permission. I was completely bewildered and, to be honest, a little creeped out. "Can you please take me home?" she pleaded, her voice filled with despair and fear. Despite the strange encounter, I didn't want to leave her stranded in the middle of nowhere at that hour. "Of course I'll help you. Just give me directions, okay?" "Okay," she replied. For the next 30 minutes, I drove aimlessly through an unfamiliar area while the girl provided instructions. Trying to ease the tension, I attempted to engage her in friendly conversation and offer comfort, but all my efforts were in vain. Something about the girl felt completely off. She appeared incredibly sad and pale, to the point where her skin had a bluish tinge. Despite standing outside in the heavy rain when I found her, she wasn't wet at all, as if raindrops just warped through her. Suspicion began to creep into my mind as she seemed to be leading me nowhere. Just as I contemplated stopping the car and asking her to leave, a small town emerged in the distance. The girl suddenly exclaimed with joy, Yes, this is my town. I remember it. I'm home." Her expression transformed into ecstasy, and her happiness momentarily infected me. However, it didn't last long. As we passed an old house, she started screaming, "This is his house. No. Drive, please. Don't leave me here. Please don't let him see me." I had no idea what she was talking about, but in a moment of confusion, I stepped on the gas and sped away. However, a few meters down the road, the girl uttered, "This is my parents' house. Thank you so much." As I turned around to smile at her, her voice immediately changed. She no longer sounded like a 20-year-old girl, but rather like an adult man, as she said, "We will never forget your favor." A cold chill ran down my spine as I couldn't believe what I was hearing. To my surprise, the girl was no longer in the back seat of my car. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. I had never felt such terror in my life, but curiosity got the better of me. I stopped the car and got out. knocking on the door of the supposed family's house. An elderly woman warmly welcomed me and offered me a place to stay. However, I wasn't there for that. I recounted the story to her, and the woman immediately became hysterical. She asked me to describe the girl, and as I did, she broke down, sobbing like a child. She shared her story with me, saying, "The girl you met is Jenna, my beautiful little girl. 30 years ago, she went missing while visiting family and was later found dead in the same area where you encountered her. She was likely murdered." A few weeks later, her father passed away from grief. They left me all alone in this world. I had been driving with the ghost of a girl in my car the entire time, and that house that terrified her, did it have something to do with her murder? I still ponder what I witnessed that day. My wife Vicky and I were returning home late at night from our nephew's wedding party, filled with joyous memories and heartfelt conversations with relatives we hadn't seen in ages. It was a winter night, around 12 a.m., and the wedding had taken place in a remote, rustic location. The moon's faint glow was the only source of light on the dimly lit road, contrasted by the heavy downpour. As I drove, Vicky drifted off to sleep, while I battled the growing fatigue threatening to overpower me. Despite knowing the risks, I pushed on, hoping to reach home quickly and find respite. I increased my speed slightly, maintaining around 65 miles per hour on the empty road. Suddenly, a figure appeared ahead, resembling a deer. I reacted instantly, slamming on the brakes, but the slippery road caused the car to skid uncontrollably. In a desperate attempt to avoid the animal, I steered off course, losing control of the vehicle. Vicky's piercing scream echoed in my ears as the car collided with a huge tree, plunging us into darkness. When I regained consciousness after what seemed like an eternity, I miraculously emerged safe, except for a few minor cuts from the shattered glass. Frantically searching for Vicky, I discovered she was nowhere to be found. No signs of injury or bloodstains in her seat, and even her belongings were absent. It felt as if she had never been with me, as if my mind had conjured her presence. Struggling to open the car door, I realized hours had passed as the dim light of dawn filtered through a thick mist enveloping the surroundings. It was around 4 or 5 a.m., and visibility was incredibly limited. Suddenly, a familiar voice pierced through the mist. Vicky's voice, filled with desperation and distress. Instinctively, my protective instincts kicked in, pushing me to sprint towards the source of her cries. For what seemed like an eternity, I ran and ran, only to find myself inside a dense forest. Its massive trees and thick bushes created a creepy atmosphere. Unfamiliar animalistic sounds mingled with Vicky's voice, an unsettling orchestra that froze me in my tracks. They were not like any creature I had encountered before. Their cries defied categorization, neither human nor animal. But soon enough, dread washed over me as I realized the origin of these haunting sounds. Emerging from behind the trees, a bunch of mutilated animals approached me. Deers, bears, dogs, and wolves, emitting unsettling cries that resonated deep within my soul. Their eyes, hauntingly human, bore into me, and some even glistened with tears. They did not attack. Instead, they stood motionless, observing me with an unsettling gaze, almost pressed against my face. I tried to escape, but I was entirely paralyzed. It felt as if they emitted an aura that prevented me from moving a single bone. Suddenly, Vicky's desperate screams snapped me back into reality, jolting me into action. Breaking free from my paralyzed state, I sprinted toward her, her cries growing louder with each step. And there she was, standing a few meters away, clothed in a long white robe that seemed out of place. Vicky never wore something like that. She never even had anything like that. She stood motionless, tears streaming down her face as she screamed, locking eyes with me. Determined to protect her, I rushed towards her, but she urgently halted my advance. "Don't come any closer," she warned, her voice trembling. "They will take you too." As she spoke, 3 towering figures emerged from the bushes behind her. They were all the same height, which was almost 3 times mine. They wore the same white robes as Vicky, their faces concealed by black masks that represented a huge eyeball. 2 of them seized Vicky by her feet, dragging her towards the bushes, while the third remained motionless, fixating its gaze on me. I lunged forward, desperate to help Vicky, only to be restrained by it. The figure clenched my wrist with an iron grip. I heard the crushing of my bones. The figure leaned down, almost bending to reach my level, whispering, "Wake up, you do not belong here." The figure kept repeating the same words, getting louder and louder, and suddenly darkness enveloped me as I fell unconscious. When I finally regained consciousness, I found myself in a hospital room, surrounded by doctors and nurses. My body felt immobilized, my bones shattered, and my voice silenced. Months passed before I could speak or regain partial mobility. When they deemed I was ready, a psychologist delivered the devastating news. The accident had claimed Vicky's life instantly, while I had slipped into a coma for 3 long months. I quickly realized that I was stuck in limbo. The 3 figures that took away Vicky represented death. I simply wasn't destined to die that night, and that's why they spared me. Now, 12 years later, I have fully recovered, except for one lingering reminder of that fateful night. A wrist that refuses to heal, a permanent testament to the strength of death's grasp.